Hi, I'm Flo, and this is Financial Flow. I'm here to inspire and be inspired in all things money. Today, I want to talk about medical expenses. They always seem to be unexpected, but there are ways you can try to get ahead of them. As I mentioned in my first video, I am a cancer survivor. I was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer when I was 29 years old. And one, I wasn't prepared. At age 29, they don't even do the testing for breast cancer. Two, it wasn't something prevalent in my immediate family. Three, I had been working out. I had been eating better. I was traveling. I was having the time of my life. The whole time my tumor was growing. So when it came down to starting treatment and having surgery and all of those things, I had to get very, very prepared very quickly. So I wanted to share a bit of that process so you all can avoid the pitfalls that I ran into, or maybe prepare, if the worst were to occur to you or one of your loved ones. Feel free to share this with anyone that might find this beneficial. I'm not going to go too much into like the diagnosis process and things of that nature. If you want to know, I'm happy to share. But this is specifically about managing your expenses and your money when it comes to serious illnesses and the medical bills associated with that. As you can see, I have everything written out already. If you want to take a screenshot, that's fine. I'm probably not going to add too much to this. I'm probably going to do more talking, but I wanted to have it here so you could see what I'm going to discuss. So nothing's hidden. You don't have to waste your time listening to me if you don't want to, but I will walk through each one of these to explain how it could be beneficial in a situation where you have a lot of medical bills. So one thing you hear a million times over in the budgeting community is emergency fund. Getting diagnosed with cancer when you weren't expecting it and having a bunch of tests and scans, blood draws, doctor's visits, surgery, all of those things. I had all those things happen within a few weeks. So once the medical bills start coming in, then it's like, oh no, you're inundated. Mind you, you have so much on your plate already because you're probably working and all of these things. And now you're at the doctor all the time. You're worried about your health and your life and all of those things. But the medical bills will not stop. They're going to keep coming. They're going to bill somebody, right? So having an emergency fund definitely will help relieve some of that stress, especially in a situation like mine where I went to having the time of my life to, hey, we found cancer cells and it's stage 3C, right? Which is pretty serious. So I needed to have money set aside. Thankfully, I had money saved, so I didn't feel like I had to use credit cards or, cut so much out of my life while bills still had to be paid, right, to avoid my medical bills. The next thing would be to check your insurance coverage. This is very important because what it's going to do is outline the out-of-pocket expenses, what you're responsible for, right? So it might be a percentage, it might be a total dollar value, and then this might change for in or out of network. So for some companies, it might be the same regardless, that you're going to have to pay X amount of dollars if you're in network or out of network. In other cases, it may differ by $500 to $1,000 or more, depending on if you go to someone in network or out of network. Mind you, there is an overall total cost that they expect you to pay on top of your premium, but depending on what the treatment is, what the test is, things of that nature, there will be a percentage that they may or may not cover, depending on what it's for. So, but to the flip side, there might be things that they cover 100%, depending on what it is. So that's why knowing your diagnoses, having good dialogue with your doctors about what's going on, what the process is, you should be able to look up in your insurance brochure whether or not your company covers whatever it is, or if they pay 100%, if they pay a percentage, if you're responsible for some, or in some cases, like with mine, once you hit a certain limit, once you fulfill your responsibility, then my coverage kicked in at 100%. So that was something that I was tracking as I was paying my medical bills, because I needed to make sure, one, I had the money set aside for my responsibility, whether that was in an emergency fund or an HSA or FSA. I'll get to that in a second. But knowing what that number is, right? So know your numbers, right? And try to, if you can, save or get ahead or prepare yourself with a credit card or whatever the case may be. So you have an idea of, okay, once I get to this point, insurance is going to kick in this much, that much, whatever. And that will help you with your financial planning in that particular scenario. Which brings me to the health savings account or the flexible spending account. Depending on the type of insurance you have or the type of plans your job offers, you may have one or the two. I think I have the FSA that up to a certain limit per year, I can contribute pre-tax towards medical expenses. I'm a cancer survivor. I still have ongoing expenses. I still have ongoing treatment. So I max this out every year because I'm probably going to use all of it every year. And I think since my diagnosis, I've only not maxed it out once, maybe twice. Other than that, I drain it dry every year because I have routine ongoing expenses in an emergency situation. And some of it does roll over. So that's the other reason why it's good to set this up now before you need it. And it covers your prescriptions. It covers co-pays, all of those things, right? But it's pre-tax and you pay and they'll reimburse you. So you get that pre-tax money back to cover your medical expenses. So between your emergency fund and your FSA, your goal is to cover your responsibility. So by the time your insurance kicks in at 100%, if it does so, you don't have anything else to worry about. The money was already there. It doesn't take away from your day-to-day life or your bills being paid because you've covered yourself in a couple of different places. So the next thing is, and this definitely applies if you don't have insurance or you don't have savings, especially if you're low income. I think it's around 40K or so, maybe less, depending on the area or the state. You can ask for reductions and waivers when you get your medical bill. Some have programs for low income people that aren't able to pay their medical bills. They'll work with you. They have payment plans, all those sorts of things, but you won't get it if you don't ask. They're not just going to offer it, but you can advocate for yourself and get that set up. The next thing is exploring grants and other funding. So specifically with breast cancer, I know there are a lot of foundations and programs to support people going through that, whether that's wigs, whether that's freezing your eggs, medical payments, things of that nature. So they will actually offer these programs for those diagnosed with breast cancer. I haven't had any other serious medical conditions to know these programs apply to all sorts of people, but I know for breast cancer specifically, there are grants and funding available for your different medical expenses. Now, you have to determine your eligibility for those. For my job and the type of insurance I had, I wasn't eligible, so I had to pay for all of my stuff out of pocket. But for other folks, this was a lifeline for them, right? They were able to cover things, say freezing their eggs and things of that nature, because they had outside funding that they didn't have to repay. So when I say this, I'm not talking about loans. I'm talking about the different programs that are available. They will offer you loans. I would say to veer away from those for the simple fact that you're already going through enough. The last thing you need is a ton of debt on top of that you weren't prepared for, that you hadn't budgeted for, that you hadn't considered prior to this life-changing event happening. So if you can avoid the loans, I would say do so. Now I'm actually going to write that here just in case someone is looking at this. Avoid the loans. One example for exploring the grants and other funding. When I was diagnosed, they wanted to start chemo immediately, but because of my age, they recommended that I froze my eggs. Problem is, for them to freeze my eggs, I would have had to pay 10 grand up front and then go through the process, which would have delayed chemo and everything else, but also it could have potentially made my tumor larger because of the hormones. But they were just like, if you don't have the 10K in cash for this, we'll offer you a loan. So on top of my necessary medical bills, they wanted me to have an unnecessary loan to freeze my eggs. I chose my health, and I said, I could be a great, rich auntie. So I did not freeze my eggs because the cost didn't make sense to me. On top of the fact that there was no guarantee I would even have viable eggs, and then I would have to pay to freeze them for however long, then pay to retrieve them, then pay to get them implanted. And there was no guarantee any of that was going to work. And it was just going to be more money and more money and more money over time. So I decided against it. But they do have programs and grants for that. Again, I just did not qualify. So the next step is potentially pay cash. Now, that sounds counterproductive, but I'm going to explain to you why I say this. One example is a friend of mine got into a car accident. She had a high deductible plan. Her deductible was like $12,000 or $13,000. When she offered to pay cash, that bill came down to $1,200. So depending on what it is, depending on your insurance, depending on your situation, it might be cheaper to pay cash. Now, for breast cancer specifically, when I looked at my explanation of benefits that I would get in the mail, my treatments were like 6 figures each, and I had 16 rounds of chemo. Paying cash wasn't really an option for that, but depending on what it is, cash might actually be better for your budget than paying with insurance. It just depends. And how do you know if it's different? Ask. You have to ask. Right? You have to ask. They're not going to tell you which is cheaper. They're not going to tell you, hey, don't use your insurance for this one, because if you do, you're going to end up paying more. They're not going to tell you that. So we're led to assume that using your insurance is always going to be better. That's not always the case. But you have to call, you have to talk to someone, you have to see what works best for your situation. But those are my best tips for handling medical expenses, especially with a serious condition. But the biggest thing would be the first thing: save. Have some money set aside, some oh crap money. You never know what's going to happen. I was not expecting my diagnosis. Luckily, like I said, I was in the best shape I had probably ever been in. I had been eating better, traveling, enjoying my life, but I was also setting money aside and paying off debt. So when the medical bills started coming in, I was able to handle that. And I worked through my treatment, which made sure I could keep my insurance, and keep my pay coming as the medical bills rolled in. So it obviously going to have to be adjustments in your budget and things of that nature. But if you save, make sure you know what your coverage is, participate in a health savings account or a flexible spending account, ask for any reductions or waivers, look into the grants and other funding, avoiding loans if you can, and then paying cash if it makes sense. This is what I would recommend to someone in that situation. Now that I know, now that I've been through it, this is what I would recommend.